The story. In a small village called Zarephath, there lived a woman named Eliana. She was a widow, and life was hard because the land was dry, and there was not enough food for everyone. One day, a man named Elijah came to the village. People said he could do miracles, and Eliana, character name, was desperate for help. Elijah told her to gather what little flour and oil she had left and make a meal for herself and her son. He promised that God would provide. Miraculously, every day the flour and oil didn't run out. It seemed like there was always enough for Eliana, her son, and even others who sought help from her. But then, something terrible happened. Eliana's son became very sick. His once happy spirit faded, and he stopped breathing. Eliana was heartbroken and turned to Elijah in despair. She accused him, asking if he came to remind her of her sins and take her son away. Elijah, despite her anger, took the lifeless boy in his arms and went to a room where he stayed. In the silence, he laid the child on his bed and prayed to God, asking why this tragedy had happened. "Lord my God," Elijah pleaded, "did you cause this pain for this poor widow? Please, let this boy live again." Amazingly, the boy's life returned. The room filled with a special feeling, and Elijah, overwhelmed with thanks, brought the child back to Eliana. With tears in her eyes, Eliana held her revived son. The room that was once sad now echoed with the sound of the boy's laughter. Grateful and in awe, Eliana spoke to Elijah, saying, "Now I know you are a man of God, and your words are true." The story of Eliana and the miracle spread through Zarephath, and people who once doubted now had a little bit of faith. Elijah's name became a symbol of hope in difficult times. The village of Zarephath, touched by something greater than themselves, learned that even in hard times, believing in miracles and having faith can bring happiness. The preceding story is based on and slightly dramatized from the Bible. 1 Kings chapter 17, the story of Elijah and the widow at Zarephath. This story reminds us of Jesus' story of Lazarus. In both stories, a dead person is raised from the dead. In the case of the Old Testament, it is related to Elijah, and in the New Testament it is a story Jesus raising Lazarus. The brother of Mary and Martha, who was raised from the dead by Jesus, is Lazarus. The story of Lazarus is found in the New Testament, in the Gospel of John, specifically in John chapter 11. While there are similarities between the two stories, such as the miraculous restoration of life, there are also significant differences in the details and circumstances. In both stories, a loved one faces death, and through divine intervention, life is restored. These narratives show the power of faith, prayer, and the divine authority of the prophets, Elijah, and Jesus in the respective contexts. 2. What does the sentence mean by that? She accused Elijah, asking if he came to remind her of her sins, in the story. In the story, when Eliana says, "Did you come to remind me of my sins?" she is expressing a moment of intense grief and despair. In times of hardship or tragedy, some people might interpret their suffering as a consequence of their past mistakes or sins. Eliana, facing the illness and apparent death of her son, is questioning whether Elijah, the man of God, has come into her life to highlight or remind her of any wrongdoing she might have committed. This type of questioning is not uncommon in religious or spiritual contexts, where individuals may grapple with feelings of guilt or a sense that their suffering is a punishment for their sins. In Eliana's case, it reflects her emotional state and the turmoil she is experiencing as a mother facing the potential loss of her child. 3. Wavering faith. The faith of the widow and the sisters, Mary and Martha. When Eliana's son died, and she accused Elijah, her emotions were likely a mix of intense grief, despair, and confusion. She had witnessed the miraculous provision of never-ending oil and flour in her home, which was a clear sign of God's presence and provision through Elijah. However, when faced with the death of her son, she couldn't immediately reconcile this tragedy with the positive experiences she had with Elijah. Her accusation may have been a moment of emotional turmoil, questioning why such a tragedy had befallen her despite the earlier miracles. It's an expression of the raw and complex emotions that can arise when people are confronted with loss and suffering. On the other hand, the regret of Mary, or Martha, when Jesus arrived late to visit Lazarus is found in the Gospel of John. In that story, Lazarus, the brother of Mary and Martha, had died, and Jesus arrived after the burial. Both Mary and Martha expressed regret, feeling that if Jesus had been there earlier, their brother would not have died. Their regret is more about the timing of Jesus' arrival and the belief that he could have prevented the death had he been present. In both cases, whether it's Eliana accusing Elijah or Mary and Martha expressing regret to Jesus, the emotions are rooted in the pain of losing a loved one and the struggle to understand the divine plan in the face of suffering. It reflects the human tendency to question and grapple with the complexities of faith and the mysteries of God's ways during times of sorrow. 4. The similarities and differences between the two stories. There are similarities and differences between the stories of Elijah raising the widow's son and Jesus raising Lazarus. A. Similarities. Desperate plea for life. Both Elijah and Jesus make fervent pleas for the restoration of life. Elijah stretches himself out on the widow's son 3 times, crying out to the Lord to return the boy's life to him. Jesus, upon arriving at Lazarus's tomb, also prays and asks God to bring Lazarus back to life. Divine intervention. In both stories, there is a clear demonstration of divine intervention. God responds to Elijah's plea and restores the widow's son to life. Similarly, Jesus, as the Son of God, exercises divine power to bring Lazarus back from the dead. B. Differences. Method of restoration. Elijah's method involves stretching himself out over the boy and pleading with God. In contrast, Jesus commands Lazarus to come out of the tomb. While Elijah's act seems more like a prayerful gesture, Jesus' command emphasizes his authority and power over death. Nature of the miracle. Elijah's miracle is framed more as a direct plea to God for the restoration of life. Jesus, on the other hand, uses Lazarus' death as an opportunity to demonstrate his power as the Son of God. Jesus calls Lazarus out of the tomb, displaying authority over death and presenting himself as the source of life. Identity of the resurrected. Elijah brings the widow's son back to life as a human being. In the case of Lazarus, Jesus not only brings him back to life, but specifically as a demonstration of his divine identity, emphasizing that he is the resurrection and the life. Summary. In summary, both Elijah and Jesus share commonalities in their desperate pleas for the restoration of life and the evident divine intervention in response. Elijah's humble plea emphasizes a prayerful connection with God, while Jesus' authoritative command over death underscores his divine identity and power as Son of God. In both instances, these miraculous events serve as powerful demonstrations of faith and divine intervention. Thank you so much for watching. Your subscriptions and shares fuel our channel's growth, and if there's a biblical character you'd like to know more about, please leave a comment.